Let's take a look at some percent problems. There's a couple of different solution strategies that I have found are very effective. The first strategy that I think is useful is proportion. And those are the problems that we just worked a few minutes ago with cross-product strategy. Another one is to simply write the equation. I think a lot of percent problems yield themselves to verbal interpretation quite easily. So let's take a look at a couple of percent problems, and we're going to work them out using both of these strategies, and we'll see if either one of them proves helpful for you. So let's go ahead and start with this one. Let's say 42 is what percent of 80? 42 is what percent of 80? First of all, I'm just going to write an equation that describes what's happening here. So 42 is what percent, well, here's the universal symbol for IDK, of is multiplication, 80. So now we have a pretty easy equation to solve. 42 equals x times 80. We simply divide both sides by 80. And we get 0.525 equals x. Now, since we're dealing with percent, we need to multiply our answer by 100, which really easiest way is to simply move the decimal 2 places to the right. So this becomes 52.5% is our value for x. So 42 is 52.5% of 80. Now, this was an example of equation strategy where we wrote an equation for our statement. Now let's try proportion strategy. So to write a proportion, we have to remember that percent is always out of 100. So we could say then that 42 is what percent, so we don't know what out of 100 compared to 80. So this is saying 42 out of 80 is what percent or amount out of 100. So if we use our cross product strategy, we have 42 times 100 equals 80 times x. So we can divide both sides by 80. And we get 4,200 divided by 80, which is 52.5 equals x. So we have 52.5%. So notice we get the same answer either way, just two different strategies to deal with 1% problem. Let's take a look at another example. Let's say on this one we have 7 is 14% of what? Okay, so again, I want to do the two different strategies. So let's start with writing the equation. We have 7 is 14%. Remember, we write percent as a decimal, 0.14. Of is multiplication, what? Which is just another way of saying x. So now we just divide both sides by the coefficient, which is 0.14. And we have 50 equals x. So 7 is 14% of the number 50. So now let's do the same thing using a proportion strategy. So it says that 7 is 14%. Remember, we write percents out of 100. So 14 out of 100 represents 14% of what number? So 7 over x is the same or equal to 14 over 100. So we apply cross product strategy. We have 7 times 100 equals x times 14. We can divide both sides by 14. And we have 700 divided by 14 is 50. So again, 7 is 14% of 50. All right, one line. So let's take a look at this statement. What percent of 17 is 90? So again, we're going to do two different strategies. Let's start with writing the equation. What percent of 17 is 90? Making it worse, sorry. Okay, so if we divide both sides by 17, we get x equals 90 divided by 17, which is 5.29. And remember, since we're dealing with percents, we need to move that decimal over 2 places to the right. So we actually have x is 529%. So let's just go back and double check and see if that's reasonable. It's asking what percent of 17 is 90. So 90 is the percent, but 17 is the whole amount, right? So it makes sense that 90 is more than 100% of 17. So let's take a look at if we wanted to write this as a proportion. So what percent, so again we're looking for what percent, so x over 100 is 90 out of 17. So notice really quickly that on the bottom here we have the whole amount. So 100 is the whole amount for percents, right? Everything's out of 100%. And 17 is the whole amount in this particular statement. So the portion is x and the portion is 90. So back to our cross product strategy, we have x times 17 equals 90 times 100. So we'll divide both sides by 17. So x equals 90 times 100 is 9,000. 9,000 divided by 17 is 529. So two different strategies to work the same type of problems. Percent problems just take a lot of practice, and once you've practiced them, they usually become quite clear.